Hi, this is Chris McKaylee with a video podcast on picking the right bill author to hopefully be your legislative champion. And of course, this is all about asking an author to carry your legislative proposal, which can often be a very time consuming and sometimes daunting task to find just the right author for a bill to introduce in the California legislature. So I wanted to chat about how some lobbyists try and pick the best bill author. As you can probably imagine with other things as well, there's really no cookie cutter approach to picking the right bill author. There are definitely some questions that might help guide you through this process to choose at least a good author and hopefully the best author for your proposed legislation. Let's start with non-controversial bills. Many bills are sort of run-of-the-mill measures, my terminology, meaning they're relatively straightforward and not that controversial. So as a result, picking the right bill author is probably a little less critical to the bill's likely success in the legislative process. But in some instances, a bill author can make or break a bill's travels through the California legislative process and ultimate signature by the governor and enactment into law. Some bills don't require much work by the author because, again, it could be non controversial, but others could actually require tremendous time and commitment by the bill's author. So, as you can imagine, picking the right legislator becomes quite the important task for certainly the more controversial and harder to pass bills. In a broad overview, I think certainly many legislators and their staff choose measures that the legislator himself or herself will author. However, in other instances, sponsors or interest groups outside the legislature will obviously approach a legislator to author their particular legislative bill. So, what are some of the things that should go into picking the right bill author? And as you can imagine, there's quite a number of factors, and this isn't exhaustive. But for example, if the bill deals with an issue in a particular legislative district, then it's natural and appropriate to have as the bill's author the legislator representing that district, at least give them the right of first refusal. If the bill's a significant policy issue, then there's always a strong desire, to have like the policy committee chair or at least a member of that particular policy committee to author your measure. In addition to some practical items, an important consideration for many lobbyists is a preference for a legislator who will thoroughly understand and, you know, personally advocate for the particular bill. An easy example might be a legislator who practiced as a CPA could be of benefit to a complicated tax law change bill, or a legislator who was an insurance agent or broker previously to tackle a complicated insurance law bill, or maybe a legislator who previously served on a local transportation authority's board of directors might be a very strong author for, say, a transportation measure or to um, go after some additional transportation funding in the budget or in a standalone bill. Obviously, a bill author who is recognized by his or her colleagues as an expert in the subject matter of your bill could be very helpful to increasing the bill's chances of success in the legislative process. Moreover, an author who works diligently in support of their bill, I think, is always an important quality in trying to achieve success. With more controversial bills that might pit major interest groups against each other in support and in opposition, it's important for a legislator to be willing and able to advocate for the bill with his or her legislative colleagues. I mean, frankly, there's no better lobbyist than the bill's author with that legislator's colleagues in their own house and even in the other house. The legislator may also be called upon to help negotiate amendments, perhaps to resolve, some powerful interest group's opposition to your bill. The legislator might speak to the media about the bill, about its purpose, and why he or she is carrying the bill. So a good author is often apparent when he or she is presenting the bill in committee or on the floor based upon how invested that legislator is in the particular bill. So let's talk through some of these factors that I certainly take into account, and I'm sure many other lobbyists do as well. House of origin. Which house do you want to start your bill in? What are the pros and cons of starting in the assembly versus the Senate? Do you want to build momentum for your bill and so maybe start in the easier house and move over to the harder house? Or do you want to tackle the more difficult house to get over that main hurdle and then get over to the other house that's easier? What are the fiscal impacts of the bill? Things like that might dictate whether you start in the Assembly or Senate. Again, there's a list of many other considerations. I'm going to tackle just a handful of them. District bills. If the sponsor of a bill is located in a particular legislative district, or the subject matter of the bill relates to a particular legislator's district, it's appropriate to first seek that legislator, that representative in the Assembly or Senate to be your bill author. That approach is generally viewed as a matter of legislative courtesy, and a legislator in this position will expect to be asked to author your bill. An additional issue here is whether to have the Assembly member or the senator author the bill. Policy expertise. When you're dealing with a substantive policy issue in a particular bill, an obvious approach is to select as an author a member of the policy committee or committees through which this controversial or substantive bill is going to travel. Even better, can you get a policy committee chair to author your bill? But if not, will one of the remaining committee members, even the vice chair, be willing to author the bill? Often, fellow committee members are more open to supporting a bill by one of their colleagues who sits on the same legislative committee. And besides, at least that way, your bill is guaranteed at least one aye vote in committee. Leadership. Naturally, members of the Assembly or Senate leadership will often make very good bill authors, but for obvious reasons, they're usually pretty selective in the bills that they choose to author. And as appealing as having, say, the Appropriations Committee chair author your bill, they can often be even more particular about which bills they agree to author, particularly if the bill is of a fiscal nature. Even they usually hold a bill or two of their own on the suspense file in an effort to try and diffuse their colleagues from being too upset because their colleagues usually don't get all of their bills off the suspense file either. Minority party members. In many instances, minority party members make excellent bill authors, especially those who enjoy good working relationships with their majority party colleagues and will sit on a particular policy committee through which your bill is going to travel. And these legislators often have particular policy expertise, or they represent a legislative district that's affected by your proposed legislation. I also look at things like work ethic. Ultimately, a lot of success, especially for a controversial or hard bill, is achieved through the work and knowledge that your author has about his or her bill. And a bill author who's committed and knowledgeable about the bill, I think, is better than an author uh, who's the exact opposite, because I've often seen where the legislator's colleagues readily recognize that the bill is not important to that legislator, and he or she's just relying or carrying it on behalf of their sponsor. One note on no sponsored bills, interest groups and lobbyists should definitely be aware that there are usually a handful of legislators each term who don't author sponsored bills. Basically, these legislators only want bills from their staff or their constituents or themselves. And sometimes this limits your ability in selecting an author, especially if it's a bill that this author should carry due to their particular legislative district or their policy expertise. So let's go through a list of questions for your consideration in picking the right bill author. Again, although any sponsor would love to get his or her ideal author, that may not always be possible. So here are some questions that you should pose to yourself in looking for the best possible author. Is he or she in a leadership position? Does the bill even need to be authored by a legislative leader? Do you need the leader of a geographic delegation, for example, to carry your bill? Let's say the chair of the Los Angeles County delegation, because your bill will benefit LA County exclusively. Do you want a group like an ethnic group of legislators, the Latino caucus, API caucus, perhaps the women's caucus, to help improve your bill's chances of success? Do you need an author with strong ties to the governor? Is the legislator a recognized leader in the subject matter of your bill so that he or she would expect to be asked to carry the bill? Does a particular legislator have a strong interest in the specific bill or the general policy area? Has the legislator authored a similar bill in the past, or does this bill amend or build upon that legislator's prior legislation? Does the legislator have particularly strong personal or committee staff to help the bill's chances of getting through the process? Is your author going to be an effective advocate for the bill? In other words, will he or she do well in presenting the bill? Are they well liked by their colleagues? How committed will this author be to your bill? Will he or she actively lobby it and talk to their colleagues in favor of getting the bill passed? Does the legislator have a good relationship with the supporters of the bill, even the opponents of the bill, that could help negotiate amendments or help ensure the bill's passage out of the legislature? For example, can this legislator be expected to negotiate amendments with the opposition to secure neutrality? Will you work well with the legislator and, just as importantly, with the legislator staff? Now, there are certainly many other questions and other factors that can go into determining who is the potential best author for your bill, but I think the points that we've talked about and the questions that have been posed will give you a pretty good avenue to at least get moving in this process.